The Long Way Home, Chapter 5, Fresh Air. Cool air washed over Jason's face as the loading ramp descended to the rocky ground. The stone flaked and scraped beneath his shoes as he stepped from the long way onto the unfamiliar world. Sunshine bathed his pale skin in a gentle warmth. Wind whistled through the branches of the pine-like trees, and he felt the natural gravity settle over his bones. Vincent strode past him and into the woods with half a glance and a keep close to the ship, and quickly faded into the shadows beneath the needle-leafed trees. "Okay," Jason said to nobody in particular. "Maybe I wouldn't be able to keep up with him on a hunt." "I checked," Trentray said from the top of the ramp. "The sensors say it's standard gravity." "Aye," Jason called out to her and the others. "It's a light world."
"Well, the Terrans call normal planets that,"
Stowaway muttered as he did his level best to stomp his way down the ramp. "Lucky me, I am one. Think you could take flight and do a quick circle for us? Maybe see if there's anything interesting nearby?"
"Why should I?"
"Well, because I figure stretching your wings a little would be more fun than heading back into the bridge to watch the logs of the landing," Jason told him evenly.
"Please do,"
Vi added as she scampered down the ramp eagerly.
"I want to see if there are fish in the river."
"Fine," Stowaway said as he stretched his azure wings and with gangly graceless enthusiasm despite his words.
"But only because you said please."
"Thank you," Jason deliberately pronounced. "I'm glad you're here." Everything was unfamiliar. New scents, strange trees, novel brush. All of it was new. All of it was a temperate forest. Vincent didn't have much time, but he knew what to look for. It was the same on a New Montreal or Hope 16 or in Terra herself. Game needed water. There would be trails. There were trails. Trails covered in contradictory tracks leading to a bend in the river where the water slowed, and along the river both upstream and downstream where the river narrowed and became rocky rapids respectively. He decided to follow one of the winding game trails upstream and upwind. There was the unmistakable pattern of cloven hooves in the mud in the hollow of the brush by the small diverting stream, and Vincent caught the faint scent of a mammal, likely a herbivore. He began to follow the tracks along the river, then away from the river and uphill into the alien forest. He was almost certain that he could pick out the scent of whatever had left such deep tracks in the mud. The scent remained on the twigs and fronds of the bush when the ground became too dry for the tracks to show.
"This place is weird,"
Stowaway told Jason as he stumbled to a stop after a technical landing. "How so?" Jason said as he shrugged a too large backpack onto his shoulders.
"Well, I come from the greatest of cities. All other cities are less good, which isn't as good as the name says. I used to fly out to the other side of the island, where the old steel plant is sometimes, since people don't really go there much. I saw something that looks a lot like that down the river a little way, and the trees look a little different in the line between here, the river, and that weird place."
Jason spared a glance towards Strandry and Vay, and who were testing plants more or less random to check on them. "You think it's a settlement?" Stowaway shrugged and said, "I don't know. It just looks like overgrown buildings from the air." Jason nodded to him and gave a short whistle to get the girl's attention before he said, "All right, let's head to the river. I figure the water will give us a pretty good chance of finding something useful. And Stowaway thinks he found a path. Lead the way."
This way,"
Stowaway said as his plumes puffed out nervously. There was a small pebble scat on the rocky ground, definitely a herbivore. The scent of the creature was growing stronger as Vincent descended further up the mountain where the trees were dispersed. The brush was thinner, and the terrain was rockier, strong and on the wind. He was getting close. He dropped low and crept forward on all fours, slowly, ever so slowly, so as to not jostle the antique bolt action slung across his back, so as to not rustle the brush hiding his canine form. Small animals chittered and squeaked at each other. The trilling of this planet's version of birds played point and counterpoint in the canopy above, and he could almost feel the warmth of his cowl at his side. His fingers found the carved ear horn scales of his son's old hunting knife. Slowly, ever so slowly, he and his Mary began to stalk his prey. Vi and Chandray had identified 2 varieties of leafy green and 1 edible taproot so far, and were wasting no time in loading the large, formerly empty compartment of the backpack with sources of vitamins and calories. Jason continually scanned the trees, just as he'd been taught, as Stowaway tromped ahead and the girls scampered between new plants to test, and his backpack. "Wild animals tend to avoid unfamiliar sounds," he explained, "so it is better not to be quiet since we'd rather not meet anything on the strip." "Aye, sir," Trentray cheerfully replied. "I said good sirring me," Jason sighed with mock weariness and said, "So Stowaway, what's your hometown like?"
"Crappy, that's why I left,"
he said with a suspicious glance over his shoulder.
How did you leave? Vi asked brightly as she brought what looked like a rind fruit to Tundre for her to scan. Stowaway narrowed his eyes at her and said, I stowed away on a Starsailor ship, of course. It was called something like, Within this hull our treasure lies. She, Jason corrected. Huh? The ship is called a she, not it. It's a ship, not a person, Stowaway said with a shrug. Jason and Tundre stopped dead in their tracks and stared in slack-jawed, scandalized silence that anyone could think something so near to blasphemy, let alone say it. Vi said into the silence. I think maybe you should take that back. Stones clattered down the rocky hill, the crack of impacts reflected on the cliff above. Bassy thrumming cores competed with each other. Vincent crouched low and crept out at an oblique angle to the noise. It was always better to shoot downhill. It was always better to shoot with the sun at your back. Slowly, silently, he and his memory crept along in the thinning shadows of the overgrowth. Why don't we just run one down, Pa? His cull had asked him long ago. Because it is cruel to make the animal die in terror, he had answered, his breath fogging as snowflakes alighted on his whiskers. Well, I'll get the biggest buck in the herd, his son had boasted. We're out here to keep the herd healthy and to put food in our freezer, son. It's not about bragging. Presently, the alien son warmed his thin shirt and the fur below. Slowly, just like his own father had taught him, just like he'd taught his cull. Listen, Jason said patiently. A ship is alive. This is just a true fact that goes all the way back to sail-powered ships and water and Terra herself. And Renexra, Tundre interjected. Aye, and Rexendra. Jason agreed with a conciliatory nod to his cousin. Point is, this is something my people, both the blood and adopted, have known about since before leaving the cradle world. The ship is made alive by her crew, the kind of folk they are, their hopes, their dreams, their flaws, their souls all mixed together in her hull, to bring her alive. A person in her own right, you follow? The Corvian boy looked at Jason, then Chandra, then at Bay, and puffed out his plumage. He clicked his beak, tilted his head, and said, Not really, it's still old metal and wires and stuff, right? Jason opened his mouth and found that he had nothing to say. He was nonplussed, flabbergasted beside himself in sheer shock. Tundre, on the other hand, asked, How did the pirate ship feel when you were aboard her? Scary, he admitted, then narrowed his eyes as if daring anyone to comment. How about aboard the Hearts long to be brought close, before Jason caught you? I don't know, just kind of calm? And what about now on the long way? Tundre asked patiently as Vi brought more fruits to deposit in Jason's backpack. I guess kind of uncertain, on edge. Even though they're all just metal, she pressed, and Jason felt a gentle swelling of pride in another swell of his chest. Oh, we're at the river, Vi declared as she sprinted in leaping bounds towards the white bend of the water peacefully flowing past. Be careful, Jason called after her. None of us can swim better than you. She splashed into the water, seemingly heedless of the caution, and disappeared beneath the glare of the slowly flowing water for a few seconds, before she emerged once more, sending droplets of water into the air to scatter the sunlight in dazzling speckles, as she declared with struggling prize hoisted above her head, There are fish! The grit-coating sun-warmed stone shifting slightly beneath Vincent's hands as he pulled himself up. Below, a herd of plump herbivores with wide mouths full of leaf-grinding teeth on short snouts below great coating horns contended with one another. They were powerful beasts, well-muscled in their broad chests, and were possessed of narrow flanks with nimble, springy hind legs. They would make fine eating. Long ago, amidst the falling snow, he instructed his son, No, not him. He's young, vital, strong. He'll sire forms of similar traits and keep his herd healthy. But that one's lived so long, and he's not all that impressive. We aren't out here for a trophy, cull. Yes, Pa. Vincent squeezed his eyes shut and willed the memory into questions. Nylon straps dug into Jason's shoulders under the weight of his companion's discoveries. He'd managed to convince Vi that it'd be better if they could catch some fish on the way back, though, so at least he wasn't wet. On the other hand, they hadn't managed to fully educate Stowaway on the nature of ships, but it was probably on account of him thinking his home was crappy. How far out do you suppose we are? Jason asked him, hoping that an easy question would keep him from retreating again. Not far, Stowaway said absently. I think I could fly there in a minute or so. Good, Jason said, and leaned out over the river to get a better look downstream, and saw that the river began to dramatically narrow. He might have been a spacer, but anybody could figure out what that would do to the current. So he said, Bye, I think you should walk the rest of the way. I'd rather not split up. Yes, sir, she called cheerfully from the water, and shot like a torpedo towards the shore. Not you too, he groaned in response. Tundre laughed at him. He fixed her with a good frown in reply.
1 minute or so later, and they were in among the ruins Stowaway had spotted from the sky. Settlement, Jason said confidently. Stowaway scoffed. You can't know that. No. But the paths are laid out in a grid. Most of the buildings are similarly sized and evenly spaced, and they all have doors and windows, Jason explained as he pointed out the features as he mentioned them. So, I think this could have been a settlement.
What does this have to do with us? Well, the people who built the settlement could have left something behind,
Trundray offered as she shrank in close to Jason's side, and her hand found his. Do you think it's dangerous? I asked, with a steady thwack of her tail against the dusty path. Probably not, like you're thinking anyway. Old rundown buildings can be dangerous on their own, like derelicts.
Spaces,
Stowaway sneered with unearned superiority. All you have to do is not be stupid. Jason grinned and said, Aye. We'll use our common sense and stick together in case one of us has an accident.
Oh, I think this used to be somebody's garden,
Vi said as she looked over a couple of lumpy rows of bushes with bright blue clusters of berries on them.
Oh,
Stowaway said and stepped forward eagerly.
Scan those. They look tasty.
Jason ran his eyes over the crumbling house. Jason was pretty sure it had been a house. Jason ran his eyes over the crumbling house and took it in with its weather-beaten siding, its hole-ridden roof, the exposed metal frame, and the holes in the plaster-like substance behind the siding. He noted the faded black scars of charring on the graying white material, along with the twisted and warped metal struts. The empty windows fixed his charges with a hostile empty stare of the sockets in a sun-bleached skull. Let's check over the settlement as quick as we can. I don't think we want to make that hike back in the dark if we can help it. Wind whipped through Vincent's fur as he lay prone behind the sun's cracked, gnarled, and dried log. Below, a large, scarred male, probably, was being challenged by a similar but younger, faster, more vital one. A group of a dozen or so of the creatures, mostly females and juveniles, probably, huddled together and trumpeted their bass rumbling calls in a low murmur. The two large males clashed, and the crack of their curled horns crashing echoed off the rocky sides of the valley like a gunshot. Vincent rested the barrel of his antique bolt-action on the fallen log. He put his iron sights on the old, scarred creature and took in a breath. Be sure, son, he said into the cold winter air long ago.
Yes, Pa,
his Cal had answered. Don't give him a wound. Put the round through a lung, or hopefully his heart. Don't make him suffer.
Yes, Pa.
Now, breathe in. Good. Now hold. Hold. Let out, and squeeze the trigger. In the present, Vincent's rifle cracked, and it echoed off the wall cliff face above him like a rolling thunder. Jason didn't like how it felt in the empty house. Dust and debris covered the small treasures and comforts of an alien family, if they had families, strewn across a likewise covered floor. Furniture had been shattered. There were more scorch marks running down the walls. He tried not to think about the age stains splattering on the walls and floor. He whispered a prayer for the souls of the dead. He asked God to help them find peace. A breeze sighed through the house as he finished his prayer, and a distant echoing crack rolled over the ruins. He was satisfied, but as he turned to leave, a glint of reflected light caught his eye from the shadows. One converging trip later, and Vincent was butchering and packing the carcass of whatever the big herd thing was, where it hung from a hook suspended from a tree branch near his ship, while Jason cleaned fish with a borrowed deer horn scaled hunting knife. Did you check the nav computer already? The kid asked as he worked. Vincent was a little surprised that a spacer kid would know how to clean a fish. Yeah. How bad? Kid, it's so bad we're all going to have to sit down and talk about it. I promised to get them home safe, mister, but George never goes back on his word. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.